just going to address the family business owners right now who don't seem to have an exit strategy that's working. First of all, your business has value. It might not be valuable to everyone you think it is, and that might include your children, and sometimes that's really hard. And I've talked to family business owners who closed their company because they never got over the fact that their children didn't want it. You might know somebody who actually does want to own your company. It might be a niece or nephew. It might be a neighbor. And it might not look like a typical family business transition to one of your children, but there are exit strategies available to you.
Welcome to Scale Smarter, where we dive into the world of business and explore practical tips and inspiring stories to help you scale your company without scaling your headcount. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Ryan Kauth, a business coach for established founders and family businesses. We're going to be covering the topic of family succession planning, which, if you plan on scaling a business, particularly a business that you're building with family, is going to be a very important topic for you. So welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Charles. Really appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, no, great to have you here. This is a topic that I have experienced firsthand, having been surrounded by family businesses, having worked in family businesses and being an employee in a family business and seeing it from that side of things as well. So maybe for the viewers, you can give us a brief overview of what family business succession planning is and, why it's so crucial for a family business.
Yeah, thanks. So, as you stated, I work with a lot of established founders, family business owners, family business leaders. Some of these established founders, it's multiple businesses, and I'm working with them on their third one or their fourth one. And some of them are founders of family businesses. And when I say that, what I typically mean is they probably have adult children working in the business, and the hope is that they own that business someday. When it comes to succession planning, there's a lot of different things that come into play, but specifically for a family business, and really for any business, what we're typically talking about in succession planning is the next owners of the company, and certainly the next executives of the company. And really, when you think about it, you can do a succession plan for any employee working in the company. Typically, you're going to hire somebody that has leadership ability, or at least you see something in them that you can educate them, mentor them into a leadership role in your company. But if you don't have a specific plan in place for how that person is going to get from where they currently are in that position to a position like an executive running a company, or adding more responsibility like owning a company someday, I like to talk about being very intentional about that. And there's lots of things that come into play with that as well. I mean, if you talk to those adult children of the founders who are working in the company, they're probably going to tell you some things like, yes, I would like to own the company someday, but I also think I'm going to probably do things a little bit differently. And sometimes that doesn't sit well with the founders because, again, they started the company. It's kind of like one of their own children. And a couple things come into play. Nobody likes to hear that their baby is ugly, right? And it might not necessarily be that extreme, but it certainly could be, hey, I think my child is fine the way they are. They don't need to be changed all that much. But again, as I talk to more and more family business owners and I talk to their adult children about owning the company someday, I have never heard an adult child working in a family business who could be the owner of the company someday say, I am going to do things exactly like my parents did them.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally believe that. And so there are obviously a number of different challenges and obstacles that a family business faces compared to a typical business that isn't sort of tied so much to family and relationships and that sort of thing. And so is that kind of one of the most common obstacles that you find in family businesses, or what other kind of common obstacles do family businesses face that might be a little bit different to a typical business?
That's kind of obstacle number one, and the way that you help that obstacle is to have regular meetings, gatherings. Sometimes you can call them something, call it the family council, call it the family board, and then some of those family council meetings need to also not just be all business, but also be fun. And when you think about it, that family council can have multiple purposes. We certainly want to think about the strategy of the company and the succession of the owners to the new owners, but we also have to think about things like, why do we even have this business? So while we're doing succession planning, our focus really isn't on the next owners. It's a generation past that. What does this company look like for my grandchildren, right? For the adult children's children, that next successor. And then the other thing that I see that typically works pretty well to get all the generations on the same page is, again, to have a purpose outside of your family business. So yes, you want to run a good company. You want to support the families of your employees. You want to do well in the community. But what else? What are the other reasons for your business to exist? Is it philanthropy? Is it some kind of community leadership? What does it look like? And typically when I see a family business, multiple generations focusing on the next generation, as well as some kind of philanthropic purpose, you tend to get more people on the same page, kind of rowing or driving in that same direction.
You touched on something there that I want to dive a little bit deeper into. You use the term like generational growth, and I know, in so many family businesses, they focus on how is this business going to be passed down through generations. But sometimes, what I've seen is that tends to create a business where the business is just kind of surviving rather than thriving, right? Like it's just trying to survive from one generation to the next. And so in terms of that sort of generational growth, what are the types of things that a family business can do to ensure that it's not just in survival mode and that it's actually growing?
Yeah, I think part of that is to start working on the strategy of those successors now. And so what I mean by that is, again, the example of the founders of the company have been kind of driving the business, growing the business. It's their strategy. And what I've found often is that next generation doesn't really understand that strategy, might not even fully feel like they understand the finances of the company. And so involving them in those decisions, which again, the founders are not used to doing. If you can do that early and mentor those next generation owners early, and by early, I mean, it could be as soon as they start with the company. That's not typically what happens, but certainly 5 years out from when you think you might want to retire or not work in the business full time. Those are the things that you really do need to talk about. And again, if you think about it, it's like anything in business or government or nonprofit, in that you really want to kind of co-create programs in a nonprofit with your clientele, or you want to make sure that if you are launching a new product, you want to involve the customers who will buy that product first, right? Same thing with the generations in the family businesses. If you can involve them early, and again, let them throw things out there, let them ask questions, but also really listen to them and think, okay, maybe this isn't exactly how I would do it, but it certainly is kind of aligned with our strategy per se, then maybe we should try that.
Yeah, I like that. So it definitely makes sense, right? Because as you have these different generations come through, they have exposure to different markets, they have exposure to different demographics potentially. They might bring an entirely different perspective, particularly if you've been running the business for 10, 20 years. And it sort of ties into what you were saying before around like nobody coming in and saying, I'm going to do things exactly the way like mum and dad did it, for example. Right. It's probably a lot down to those sort of different generational changes. And I guess, that sort of ties into one thought I had, and I know we chatted about this a little bit before we started the recording, around like when you're in a family business, there's probably a lot more emotion attached to things than necessarily in a non-family business, right? And so how do you balance those sort of emotional differences when building a family business, planning for succession, especially when it comes to things like, profit versus supporting the family, a whole lot of different emotions there than you would typically have in a business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If you think about your reactions and what you worry about, I'm going to be anxious about the finances of my company. I'm going to be anxious about the emotions that I'm going to go through when I'm transitioning out and my adult children are taking over from an ownership standpoint, a leadership standpoint. You can do a lot from those being anxious about your finances stand, right? You can put a lot of things into place. And I think doing that is really important with your succession plan and your exit strategy for your company. Is really working through those operational things, those financial things, because I'm going to tell you this. It's going to be a lot more emotional than you think at certain times. Again, if you built the company, you've been there way more than you probably wanted to. Right. And so there's a lot of emotion. If someone is stepping into the main role that you had as the founder of the company, whatever title you had, if your adult child is stepping into that role, you're going to look at that role and say, well, that's not how I did it. And so there's those emotions with your position. There's the emotions of owning the company. There's the emotions of, wait a minute, I'm transitioning out of the company. Now what am I going to do? Well, part of that now what am I going to do is, again, if you've got that regular family meeting and you're talking about the grandkids and you're talking about the purpose of this family business, the philanthropy and things like that, that is what will help you transition out of the business.
Yeah, and this is so true, right? It really does become your baby. It becomes another family member. I've experienced that myself in kind of building and exiting a company. And in that case, it obviously wasn't a family business, but by the time you hand it over, it very much feels like you're handing over a child to somebody else. And you don't always necessarily like what they do with your child once you hand it over. And so I'm sure, like, in that space, you've seen a lot of different things. You've seen a lot of challenges, a lot of successes. And is there a particular challenging case, without sort of naming names, that you've seen? And maybe you can talk through how you navigated that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I haven't talked about yet is family members that are not working in the business, but might have ownership in the company. And again, the assumption there is, they show up for the annual meeting to make sure the company is still standing and they might get their check or, whatever that might look like. There are family businesses I have worked with where there are owners in the company that have an office and everybody knows that they're just really not there because they really don't have a position in the company. And so those are things that make it even more challenging because you also have to have a succession plan for them and what that particularly looks like. And as silly as it might sound, with somebody who has an office at the business and really has no role in the company, do you think they're going to be emotional about losing that office someday? They absolutely will. And so having a succession plan for every family member that's in the business is really important. And choosing who the person is who is going to work with each one of those family members with their succession plan is also a really important piece. Because chances are, let's say it's a second generation company, there are 4 children, 2 are working in the business and 2 are not. Well, more than likely, one of those children not working in the business and one of the children who is working in the business, they are not the favorite siblings with each other, right? So you might not want to choose that one to work that way. Again, sometimes a third party coming in to be the bad guy like me as a coach can be helpful, but also having that same meeting, deciding who is going to be in that family meeting, not just the annual meeting where everybody shows up to see how things are going, but everyone who has a succession plan moving out of the business, invited to some kind of meeting where everybody is. Again, is that a business meeting? Is that more of a fun meeting? It's kind of up to the culture of that company to determine. But that inner circle, that maybe that family council, or you could call it something different, that's one thing. You might have to have another gathering that is a little bit more than just annual. Again, it takes a lot of time, but that's all part of executive succession plans. Those things take a lot of time.
Yeah, no, it's such a great point. And I hadn't thought about, you mentioned earlier around like getting family members involved earlier in the process, or as early as possible, maybe as soon as they join the business or even before. And I've experienced that, the person that has an office that's a family member that you're like, what are they really doing here in this business? And I guess that once again, even from my own experience and changing gears a little bit, you mentioned kind of the inclusion, making sure people are involved, and then the leadership development. But what's your sort of take on non-family members in a growing family business? Does that affect the kind of leadership development? How do you see that working?
I think with executives in a family business, they need to come in understanding what they can and can't do. So if the family business is adamant about, we are never going to have a non-family member CEO, well, that non-family member executive has to know that, being upfront. But I've seen lots of family businesses hire non-family member CEOs. They don't own any part of the company. They're typically not offered that. But it's almost like an interim role where it's understood you're going to be in this CEO position. You're a non-family member, and part of your role is going to help this adult child become the CEO. You're going to essentially mentor them along the way. I've seen that done very successfully. And there certainly today are plenty of non-family member CEOs who are the CEO of the family business. Typically, they're not going to get any ownership in the company, but lots of CEOs don't.
I guess, in that case, you're potentially bringing in a set of skills and experience that maybe is just not there within the family, right? It's not to say it can't be kind of trained or grown within the family business for the future, like next sort of generations, but right here, right now, that skill set just may not exist within the family, right? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Not at all. Again, just making sure that everyone is on the same page when that happens. There's typically an end time for that non-family member CEO role. It might not be exactly when you think, because, okay, maybe this family member is still not ready, or maybe they're a lot more ready than most people thought. So maybe it ends. But again, that CEO could stay on in a senior vice president role or something like that as well, while that family member is the CEO for a while. So there's lots of situations. It really depends on the succession plan, how it's working, how you adjust, and then going back to that core family council, what kind of decisions are being made there.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've experienced in my career as well is I saw an example where an external CEO was brought in as the family started planning for an exit from their business. I remember, while I wasn't necessarily involved in all of the family meetings, being a non-family member, I was involved in meetings where, there were multiple generations talking about the fact that, hey, it's time for us as a family to exit this business. So in terms of once you do get to thinking about actual exit strategies for the whole family, are there big differences between kind of an exit between a family and a non-family business? Are there sort of unique challenges that one faces that the other doesn't?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the biggest difference is how many family members currently own the company, right? And can we all agree more or less on how this exit is going to happen? And really, the question is, who are we exiting to? Are we exiting to a private equity company? Are we exiting to a competitor? What do we think that buyer is going to do with our company, right? We've got employees that we care about. I've seen a lot of family businesses exit to employee ownership, like an ESOP or something like that. And typically what that does is that will keep that business in the community at least longer than, say, another buyer, an outside buyer, strategic buyer might for that particular company. Again, I don't think it's any surprise that a lot of small business owners don't always take the best offer. They typically take the offer they like the best based on a number of factors. And it's not just the best offer from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, I experienced exactly that. Like when I exited one of my businesses, in terms of the offers that were on the table, while it wasn't a family business, so many of the staff had been working with me for so long that to me, they did feel a lot like family. I know that's very cliche, family members in the in the business, but yeah. I was much more interested in what was going to happen with the people than necessarily what was going to happen with the company. And so that absolutely have a very big impact on the decision you make on an exit direction, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that and shared that, because that's a lot more typical than the other way, where I'm just going to take the best offer. And after I exit, I really don't care what happens. That's not typically how it goes, because as you were talking about before, there's definitely emotion involved in this. And that's a good thing. I mean, that could keep the company that you built in the community that you built it longer. And while you think it might sound cliche to say, I felt like my staff that I hired were my family members, that is actually a very typical feeling for most small business owners. And so honestly, I think we need to talk more about that, because it's typically just looked at it from a standpoint of, it's a business transaction and that's it. We all know that it really isn't.
Yeah, no, there's a whole lot more to it than just the the business transaction. If you could just do
Right.
numbers on a spreadsheet, that's one thing, right? But
Yeah,
the emotional side of it adds a whole nother element to it all, that's for sure.
absolutely.
I'd like to actually step back for a moment. This is a very unique side of business that I think, a lot of people don't necessarily think of. A lot of people, unless they've grown up in a family business, probably haven't really even considered the differences between family business and non-family business. And so I'm really interested in kind of what was the moment or experience that drew you into this whole sort of family business side and family business succession?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started out a while back helping general managers of companies buy the current owners out. For whatever reason, I had like 3, 4, 5 of those in a row. And I felt bad for these owners that they didn't have adult children that were either working in the business or that they could exit to. And so I just started studying what are the differences? How could that owner have done things differently? Because by the way, all of them at one point during that time I was coaching them through this, or really I was coaching the GM to be an owner. I heard from that owner, I really wish one of my kids would have been the owner. And so that just made me study, learn. Certainly there's that aspect to it. But then the next aspect is, can I get some clients and things like that? So started getting some family business clients, found out what I was reading, what I was hearing was very true. Learn some other things, along the way. I just really like it. I like it from a standpoint of, I really like when a company exits to a solution that keeps that company in the community where it either started 20 years ago or 100 years ago. I think those things are really important and are really underrated when it comes to economic development, what that city or county is about, because those are really good stories, in my opinion. And so for me, it's just something that, while maybe I fell into it and really was kind of motivated to learn and help, again, that's just what I like to do, what I'm drawn to, and things like that. I think I have developed, the empathy for the current generation owner, but also for the next generation owner as well, where in a strange way, they're kind of almost looking at it like a strategic buy, just like any business owner acquiring a company would. Nobody is going to acquire a company and say, I'm going to run it exactly like they were doing. Yeah. Nobody does that, right? Otherwise you wouldn't buy it. So looking at it from that standpoint, to me, it's challenging and it's also fun.
Yeah, well, that's it's always great when you can do something that you're actually enjoying doing, right? And
Right.
you talked about there, like that in some cases, you're having to work with the GM, you might be working with the founder, particularly, yeah, if there's no adult children coming through that are looking like they're going to be in a position to help continue the business anytime soon. And so can you talk us through, like, what does that look like, that engagement with you? Like, what is the kind of step-by-step approach of once somebody first engages with you as a sort of new family business client?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I do is I interview everybody. I try to do it in person as much as I can. I know we're kind of living in a work from home, remote, virtual world. But again, if I can, I try to do it as much in person as possible. It doesn't always work out that way. But then the next thing I do is I talk to the founders about the succession plan for not just your adult children who are going to own this business someday, but also for you. Surprisingly, they actually have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do or what they want to do. They just haven't put any plans into place yet. And by plans, I don't necessarily mean they're writing out some document. I mean, they're talking about a timeline, because they know things like, well, I'm going to spend more time with my grandkids, or I'm going to spend more time volunteering, or I'm going to spend more time doing this. And it's typically not leisure. It's typically kind of grandparenting, work in the community, and things like that. And I think that's fantastic. It's rare that I find a succession plan or those ideas where, I'm going to go golfing or fishing all day. And because I know in 3 months they're going to be bored, right? So what are you exiting to? And then getting that family together is really the next big step. And what are those purposes we're getting that family together around? Because I can't be the middle person or become part of a triangle between the current owners and the next owners. That's never going to work. I've got to get everybody in the same room, talk about the positive things that came out of the interview, and really try to help that next generation of owners to be confident to be owners and work through the different maybe education plans, maybe mentoring plans, and those types of things. Again, they've got to be confident to move forward, and they have to want to move forward. Sometimes they're not even sure, right? They haven't even made the decision that, yes, I do want to own this company. So they might be thinking, yeah, it'd be nice. So I talk to them about things like, all right, if you weren't working here, what kind of company would you own? And sometimes I hear, I wouldn't own one. But I typically hear, this is what I would do if I wasn't here. And we talk about that stuff. I think sometimes that might surprise some people. But again, they've seen their parents do certain things. They don't know everything their parents have done. And so they see what they like and they see what they don't like, and they want to do things a little bit differently. And just because you're doing things differently doesn't mean you're tanking the company, right? It just means, here's how we think we can do this. So let's get the support around them that they potentially need.
There's kind of three things that you said there that I really like to focus in on for a moment. You talked about where is the current owner, founder, etc. exiting to. You talked around the second generation, third generation family member, and whether they even want to take over the business. And then you mentioned around the sort of hesitation as well. And so I kind of wanted to circle back onto that. Looking at those three things, is there some reluctance, some hesitation around dad's been running this business for so long, or mum's been running this business for so long, I'm not going to be able to fill their shoes?
Yeah, and typically the reason I see that hesitation is because a lot of founders have operational things still in their head and not into SOPs or procedures or policies that are written, right? Or even in video form. And so because those things don't exist, that makes the adult children who could be the successors a lot less confident, because what they're thinking is, well, dad has been doing this for 30 years. I can't just do what he's doing. And the reality is, yeah, actually they can, but it would be really helpful if there was an SOP or there were procedures that they understood that their parents have been doing really for years, but they just don't talk. And again, usually that stuff comes up in the interviews. And there's maybe like 5 to 7 questions that I always ask. Maybe I'll ask for some clarification in those interviews, but that stuff always comes out.
Yeah, no, I can imagine there's, it sounds like there's a lot that you would uncover in those that are probably things that the family members have never really even talked to each other about, right?
That comes out sometimes too.
Just as you're talking then, it made me think, obviously, I run my own business with a non-family member co-founder. Do you think for non-family member businesses, there are sort of lessons and takeaways from family businesses that, often get skipped, get looked over, just, you're not even exposed, you're kind of naive to it. So they're kind of advantages from a family business that we miss out on in non-family business.
Yeah, I think, 2 things that came to mind when you were talking about that. One is just succession plans in general. Most companies don't have them. Most founders have thought about how they're going to exit, but they haven't necessarily planned for it. And I think when you have kids and you're thinking about, well, maybe they could be in the business, or maybe you started the business thinking, this would be great to have my kids work with me in this business or own this company someday. I think that's number one, the succession plans and kind of the exit strategies and, and how you think through that. I think number 2 is, the emotion and the purpose of why you're doing your business, right? I mean, some of it is, this is my expertise and I'm leveraging this. Some of this is, well, I'm, making a living for myself and my family. But some of it then is, there's probably other purposes you're doing this. Is it, I really like my community, I can contribute to my community? Is it, I've got causes that I donate to, those kind of things. And sometimes the family business has more of a tendency to think about those things than a non-family business. However, again, founders, owners of companies, they're more than founders and owners of companies. They've got family roles, they've got community roles, things like that. And I think sometimes if it's not a family business, the community members or outsiders don't necessarily think about those things with each particular.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's great. And you're absolutely right. I've seen that firsthand where, family businesses, they might be much better known in a community because there are so many family members that are associated with that particular business involved in, it might be the family members are involved in very different aspects of their community, but there's that, it's almost like a kind of really great brand awareness tied
Right.
back to, the family tied back to the brand and the business. And that, like, as you were saying that, it got me thinking. You talked around things like maybe as a family business, you come together and decide on, areas of the community you're going to invest in or support or that sort of thing. And so I imagine there's an added dynamic I'd never really thought around, leaving the family stuff at home and the family business stuff in the business. Is that a dynamic that you've come across, like where it's stuff from home spills into the business and vice versa? And it might not necessarily be a negative thing, right? It might be positive things that are happening outside of the family that's having an impact on the business as well.
Yeah, and here's how I typically tackle that is each person kind of has a preference. I'm going to use this as an example. Co-founder mom and next generation daughter, and there's a grandchild involved, right? And co-founder mom is watching this grandchild so that daughter can work, right? Well, what do you think they're talking about when they're exchanging grandchild, right? How was work? They're talking about the company probably. And so in those interviews, it came out where I like leaving work at work as much as possible. I don't actually mind when we're talking shop outside of work at family events and things like that, but as much as possible, I would love to leave work at work. Now, we all know as the owner of a company, there are going to be elements where you don't leave work at work. That's always going to happen as the owner of the company, right? But if you can do some time management things that help you as much as possible leave work at work, then I would say do those things. But those conversations, those intergenerational conversations have to happen because more than likely founder did not leave work at work. Yeah. And that might be why next generation wants to do some things different, right? Because they saw mom, they saw dad not leave work at work.
It's something that affects all of us, right? Regardless of whether it's a family business or not. But particularly in a family business when it's multiple family members that could all be, tied into the same issue or success or anything like that. I could imagine as kind of a young family member growing up in that environment, it may just feel like the business consumes everything, all conversations, all day, every day, right? I'm interested, is there anything that you've got on at the moment in terms of projects and goals that you're particularly passionate about, that, any particularly businesses that you're working with that, you're seeing exciting transformations on? Talk me through what's going on.
As you know, I have several family business clients. I love working on succession plans and, exit strategies and things like that. I really like working with family businesses that want to keep their business in their community. And there are certainly exit strategies for that. Like I was talking about employee ownership as one of those, and then I've got other projects going on. I do some university teaching. I teach classes now and then, usually 1 or 2 a semester, something like that. It keeps me sharp and I enjoy the interactions with college students. And then I serve on some boards for some really dynamic organizations. Some are more startup mode than others. And then I do some volunteering with startups as well. So those are just some of the other things that I do. And, all of those things can be exciting, from someone pivoting to another business where they see an opportunity in a community to, again, serving, a nonprofit, serving a specific type of clientele and really getting results for the different kind of work that they're doing when others have tried different things. And this is what's really working right now.
There's so many different areas that you touched on there. Cool. I can see how those things all sort of tie together as well, which is super cool. And so I'm thinking, for somebody out there, if they're wanting to engage with you, like what's the best way for them to kind of reach out, to get in touch? What does that process look like for you?
Yeah, typically the best way is to message me on LinkedIn, connect with me there. You can shoot me an email at ryankauth@gmail.com. My calendar is open really to anyone. And I typically start out with just a 30-minute conversation. If it's not a mutual fit, then I will help you find someone who can help you. You might get done talking to me after 20 minutes and be like, no, you're not the guy for me. And I'm cool with that. But I certainly would like to help you get to your next phase and be helpful in that way. So even if I can't directly help you, I would certainly like to figure out a way to do that.
Got me thinking about something as you're talking there. We've talked a lot about the sort of the founder, the owner, but that's not necessarily the only people that should be reaching out to you, right? Like you might be that second or third generation person worried about where your family business is going to go. Is that kind of fair to say that it might be, it might be somebody else that's not feeling like there's a succession plan in the family business higher up the food chain?
Yeah, one of the reasons I like teaching and working with college students is, the traditional college student age of 21, 22, maybe a little older. Some of those students are in family businesses, and helping them be able to ask their parents about certain things, that alone can be, rewarding in itself. So while I typically am working for that family business and I'm typically engaged by the older generation, there are times where I'm engaged by the younger generation to help them through that ownership succession. And really, when I think about it, that's how I started out. I started working for the GMs, the non-owners, helping them buy that business and then helping them and their family transition into what does it look like to now own the business, right? Yes, as a GM, I had a lot of responsibilities for the owner of the company, but I still didn't own it. Now I own it. It's a little different. Sometimes it's a lot different. One of those things I worked with them and the spouses and their kids, and, have your kids come in and sweep the floor, spend some time with you that way. It's the same thing as you working out in the yard with your kids. Why not have them come to the business and kind of work alongside of you too?
Certainly a great way to get exposure to what's actually going on behind, particularly as the really young generation, right? Like they got no idea necessarily what's going on. And a great way to be exposed to the business and sort of work your way up. That's super cool. So as we start wrapping up here, I'm interested, there's a family business owner out there listening at the moment. What's the kind of one piece of advice you would give them as they're thinking through this whole succession process?
I'm just going to address the family business owners right now who don't seem to have an exit strategy that's working. First of all, your business has value. It might not be valuable to everyone you think it is, and that might include your children, and sometimes that's really hard. And I've talked to family business owners who closed their company because they never got over the fact that their children didn't want it. You might know somebody who actually does want to own your company. It might be a niece or nephew. It might be a neighbor. And it might not look like a typical family business transition to one of your children, but there are exit strategies available to you that, maybe they won't be as satisfying as having a business for your children, but succeeding your business to somebody that you currently know or a group of employees or all your employees can be just as rewarding when you look back as it can be to your children.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. I think that ties back to the sort of emotional side we were talking about before, right? As a founder, for a long time, you may have had these dreams and visions of your family taking over the business and have very clear pictures in your mind how that's going to all play out. But that's not necessarily the reality. And I think there are some amazing businesses out there that probably end up just kind of folding and closing, even though, like you say, there's a nephew, a neighbor, a staff member that could have and would have and wanted to be involved in that succession process that just never got considered.
So there's always a way, and grab a spot on my calendar and let's talk about it. It's a free conversation.
No, that's cool. Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate your time today. And I think there's probably a lot of family members out there that are sitting there having a whole lot of wheels kind of turning in their head at the moment about all the things that we've talked about. So yeah, thanks again. And anything else that, before we leave that you wanted to kind of share with the community?
Thanks again for having me on here. I know we talked about a lot of things, but I don't want to pile on at this point. But again, just thanks again. I really appreciated the conversation.
Awesome. No, that's cool. Thanks a lot, Ryan. And thanks everyone. And we'll see you